Welcome back to another episode of Supercoach, mates. This week was a pretty tough week. A lot of primos getting subbed off or injured. A lot of rookies failing to score well. But for me, I scored the 21.37 and I'm hovering at around 8,000, so nothing too spectacular. But how about you, Thomas? What are you at? And did you manage to avoid any of that carnage, especially with Mills and stuff?
Yeah, I got pretty lucky, to be fair. Well, to some degree, I scored just over 2,200. I was looking at 2,400 before the Sunday games hit, and then copped a steal, Sinclair, shit show. Probably got lucky out of all of the, well, not really, out of the two really between Mills and Steele. Considering I missed out Mills, probably Brayshaw ended up being the best pick of the bunch, considering he was actually the fittest. The only one left standing by the end of the round, essentially, with Steele's precaution in injury. But yeah, it's been a frustrating season, I guess, trying to play catch up the whole year, but slowly starting to make ground pretty quickly now. That almost in the top 15,000, which is good from where I started in the 40,000. So hopefully can push a bit stronger into the back end of this, or definitely to the second half of the season. That's for sure. I think the team's stacking up pretty nicely. But moving swiftly forward to play comparison this round, we're trying to do a little bit different this week, trying to go a little bit different, trying to find a few pods here and there. I understand a lot of players or people have got the same team, sort of, all things considered with the premiums and all that. But two players that's definitely a bit under the radar, definitely with regards to ownership. I know in our write-up this week for Patreon, we spoke about your Lockie Whitfields and McGraths, those few discounted premiums. But these two in particular in the early 500 marks. One being Nick Newman, who's done pretty well. He's had a few iffy scores, but in all was averaging 100. And then Darcy Moore is obviously, you can talk a bit more about, Jonas. I didn't actually realise he popped off in the last 5 weeks, averaging 100 plus. Hasn't gone under 100 since, I think, round 6 or something. Pretty impressive. What are your thoughts on these two as something a little bit different? Maybe more so if you're playing for league rather than overall in this scenario.
Yeah, they're not top 6, but they both have shown some pretty good scoring. If I had to pick one, I'd probably go Darcy Moore because he gets a lot of points from impact sort of intercept play. Plus he takes a few kick-ins, and he also doesn't have that horrific round 15 bye that Newman has, which will see a lot of players not being able to play. So I think I'd be going more because of those factors. It is tough though, because Moore is a key defense sort of post, and whilst he is quite agile, he is a key defender and isn't looking for those cheap sort of touches as much, whereas Newman is a bit more of a seagull. But with Newman, he has to compete with the likes of Sard, Doherty, and a few others down there where he might be losing a few points and his ceiling's a bit capped. And yeah, as you said there, the inconsistency is a bit of a concern. I think he scored 60 something against Brisbane last week or the week before. So yeah, 61. And he's gone 139 against West Coast and 58. So I'm not liking that sort of level of volatility. So I'd be picking more. But if you have a bit more change, I'd be looking at someone like a Sinclair who isn't too much more, or someone who's at least going to give you a bit more consistent scoring and has shown to do so in the past.
Yeah, pretty much agree with what you said. Yeah, Newman's probably a bit too inconsistent for my liking. I think he almost helps with Doherty back in the side to some degree, because Doherty's been pushing more up into the midfield. But yeah, I think he really depends on his opponent, and if he has to play a bit of a one-on-one small defender on, if that's the case, his score suffers. But yeah, Moore's an interesting one because he's in that similar mould to like a Cal Wilkie, where he plays on a man, but he plays off it essentially. So he goes up as a third intercept marker, and his scoring's gone through the roof, and it probably helps that Collingwood he's doing so well at the moment, and he's so consistent in what he's able to do, and his disposal efficiency is so good as well. Our D50 is pretty reliable. I think this weekend he went, from what I checked, about 80 to 90% disposal efficiency by foot, which is pretty good. And he's obviously Mr. Reliable down there. He never really gets beaten one-on-one. Well, not one-on-one, but as an intercept marker. So, yeah, I guess if you want to go him, it could be one to look at. I mean, he's the same, as I said, same scoring as Cal Wilkie, where most of the time he scores all right, just purely with the amount of intercept marks and rebound 50s he gets. But is he taking kickouts as well? Yeah, for Collingwood, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he takes a few. Dacos has the fair share of them, but him and Dacos share them. He probably has like 25% of kick-ins.
Yeah. Yeah, so you get a few points out of there as well. Moving on to the midfielders, two of which who went gangbusters on the weekend against each other. Matty Rao was probably the one player that everyone thought Anderson was going to be on the weekend. Unfortunately for Jonas, who decided to VC Anderson. But Rao was basically the beneficiary of this week. He likes to play West Coast. Smashed him up pretty much in every possible category and decided to try and get as many tackles as physically humanly possible with close to 20. And an interesting one in Tim Kelly is a bit reduced price as well at 530k. Has pumped out a numerous hundred and is shown to be capable of scoring your 130s and 140s when need be. What are your thoughts on these two? Is any of these kind of tickling your fancy with regards to a cheaper priced option, considering that your top echelon of midfielders are now at your 600k price bracket? What are your thoughts on bringing in any of these two if you want to try and save some money in the midfield?
I'm not too sold on either pick, to be honest. I mean, they've both had some really good scores, and Raul is obviously getting a lot of his points through tackling, but I feel like that game really suited him because it was played within the arcs a fair bit. I just don't see the value in picking up one of these players because at the end of the day, you want to be picking midfielders who are going to be averaging above 110, and I don't see either of these two going 110. So you'll be losing a bit of money each week when every team is fully upgraded. So I'd rather avoid both of them and cough up a bit more on picking a player who you'd be more confident can finish the year as a top 8 averaging 5 or more points. Because if you got, say, a Raul in there who averages, let's just say 105, compared to like a Zach Merritt who might average 113, if you combine that over 8 weeks or something like that, that's 64 points. Plus Merritt has a very soft fixture, stuff like that. So I don't think the merit in saving a tiny bit of money on one of these picks who have shown the ability to go below 100 a fair few times this year is worth going for and pursuing.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I guess if I was forced to choose, I'd probably pick a Rao, just because I think he's back to his best. The problem with Kelly is when they play a side that isn't Gold Coast, and is a lot stronger in the midfield depth wise, and can really mitigate essentially one midfielder they can worry about in Kelly. It's pretty much game over for him. You look at the likes of Geelong and do it pretty well. Any team with a tagger as well would probably sit on him as well, because you just know that because Kelly's the only one that's got any sort of influence in that midfield side for West Coast. It's lights out for him if he gets any sort of attention, I think. But yeah, Raul, I guess is with him. It's risky as well because obviously we know his history and all that, but there's probably better options out there. And I think with the midfield, you just want to get right. But I guess if you want to take that risk, I would definitely wouldn't do it if you had Anderson in your side. But if you didn't have Anderson and were looking for a cheaper option, Rao could be it, just with a low break even as well. But yeah, moving forward to actually quite an interesting debate for the forward line or ruck line as well, for Cameron's perspective. Two players who have definitely, one coming back from injury and has shown premium potential in the past, but also Butters, who started off the year slowly but has just gone gangbusters in the last 3 to 4 weeks. and is skyrocketed into the kind of 540, 550 category range. And Cameron, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is available this week to play. And if he is fit, he's got a break even at 55. What are your thoughts on picking either of these two? I'll probably give you two questions. First of all, would you pick either of them for your forward line if you had a spot? But I know that we'll speak about this later on with the lack of rookie and cash generation, but would you even pick him as an extra forward and then play like a Dunkley or someone in the midfield to kind of cover and create a cheaper option, essentially as a premium?
Yeah, it's a tough question. They both have the ability to be picks that really pay off, especially Cameron because he's 100k cheaper than Butters, has the DPP. But I don't think I'd be going Cameron this week for a few reasons. Gawn's going to get forward ruck DPP. And then how many forward rucks do you need in your team? Plus, with Cox playing very well last week, I have doubts as to how much ruck time Cameron will get early on. He might be managed into it a bit more, might have like 60% TOG first week. I know when Cox came back after his injury, albeit was a different injury. He wasn't on the ground for very long. I think he had 58% time on ground. So we might take a similar sort of line of approach with Cameron. And so whilst he has the upside and has been scoring really well, I'd probably wait for Gawn with the DPP. And Butters is someone who has sort of beaten up on two pretty poor teams in the last 2 weeks in Essendon and North Melbourne. And so he's got a pretty favourable-ish run coming up. He's got Melbourne, Richmond and Hawthorn in the next three. So he could go very well against Richmond and Hawthorn in particular. But in the run home, he does have a stretch of teams where they might mitigate, like Geelong. He's scoring a bit because he is a bit of a downhill skier. He scored 67 and 79 in rounds 2 and 3, which were games that Port Adelaide lost. And he's coming up against some opposition who might challenge Port. So he's one where I like it, but he is 564k, so he's pretty expensive. You could almost wait until Petrarca or Walsh get forward eligibility and then pay 50,000 more for them, who I'd be far more confident can sustain good scoring for the whole year. So I'd be going probably, if I had to pick one, Butters, but he does have some durability concerns. So I'd, again, be waiting out and looking at bringing in one of those midfield turn forwards.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. I mean, Cameron plays Carlton, obviously Collingwood Carlton on Sunday. And who they play, just double check, Carlton played the Dogs and managed to mitigate or nullify English's influence a fair bit as well. So regardless of the fact of what Cameron's capable of, I think Pitney does a pretty good job at mitigating opposition ruckman's influence around the ground, which is one thing. Obviously, his break-even's pretty low, but I think if I forced to pick specifically for this week, Butters could be one to look for. I do agree with what Jonas says with regards to durability. He's had that in the past. I'm still a strong believer in the fact that he plays full-time mid. He's going to get banged up a lot. And it's hard to sustain. Maybe it could be that because he's played a lot of forward in the first half of the year now, he's starting to push to midfield now. But even then, he's still at a pretty pricey a high-priced forward option. But it's one of those things where he's capable of scoring a 140 on a consistent basis as well. But I'd be picking Butters this week in particular. I think there's a fair bit of risk picking Cameron. You don't know how he's going to hold up full-time ruck. Obviously, it's a bit hard with the break-even being so low. Ideally, you want a high break-even to stand for one more week. But I think even with an initial price jump and Gawn's potential forward eligibility, you may as well wait a week and pick your poison essentially between Gawn and Cameron if you want a ruck forward swing. But moving on to our last versus series, rookies obviously a hard and scarce commodity to come by at the moment, but two of which are around the same price bracket. Obviously, Blake Drury, who started all right against St Kilda, as expected against us, who tend to leak points against opposition defenders, and just fell off a cliff against Port. Barely touched it. 17 Supercoach points, has a pretty high break even for a rookie. And then you flip that to Harry Sharp, who's 20k more expensive and actually looked all right on the weekend for a 68 return. However, are you a little bit concerned with either of these job security issues? Obviously, Jury simply to the fact that he gets dropped because of poor performance. Having said that, they've had about 4 or 5 injuries that game, so that could save him. Or Harry Sharp. Obviously, Rich is the main omission. What are your thoughts on either of these two? And is either of these two, a plan to bring into your own team?
Yeah, I don't love either of these two rookies. It's almost like the best of a bad bunch and lack of rookies. If I had to pick one, I'd be going Sharp because he's been in the system now for a couple of years. He's got a 68 in his 3-round rolling average for the next 3. And he just seems to be a bit of a better player, whereas Drury, it took him a little while to get in. He scored 17 on the weekend, which doesn't fill you with a whole lot of confidence. And even if he does hold his spot, what happens if he scores 30? He's not going to make much money, and then he could get dropped and be a dead rookie. Whereas if Sharp plays one more game, he should spike some money, and then you pray he comes back at some stage. If Rich comes in, drops Sharp, but then Rich, say, gets managed in a few weeks' time. So I'd be going Sharp, but neither rookie I expect to make 150,000, so they're not rookies I'd be selling the house to try and get in.
Yeah, that's understandable. I mean, I think the benefit, obviously, if you strap for cash, then obviously you probably go Drury. I think at this point in the season, especially from what I've seen anyway, I don't know if you're differing, Jonas, but I know for myself, I've got 3 upgrades left, not including Sheasel, and that's 3 upgrades plus a Hopper injury trade out. And for me, I think 20k probably isn't the end of the world, and probably Sharp has the potential to score more. I know North, just purely based on the fact they get smacked most weeks, doesn't help his case. But I guess a positive, if you look at it from perspective that cash isn't a concern for you, then Drury, because of his high break, he's still negative 10, but it's a still pretty high break even for someone who's played 2 games. He won't dramatically go up in price, especially if there's another poor game. So I guess you can still pick him up at around 120, 130k anyway. So, you just treat that as a regular rookie at that point. But I guess if you're looking at it as pure bench fodder, then probably Jury's your bloke who can allow you to get maybe an extra 20k to an Oliver or something like that. But I guess it's really dependent on your team. But moving on anyway to the overrated, underrated segment of the podcast. So the first question being, obviously with this whole conversation surrounding rookies who aren't making cash or lack of cash generation, struggling to finish teams with full premiums, what are your thoughts on bringing in players? And I'm just use 2 examples in Withard and Redmond, who started off the season well. Who were priced as a premium, both above 500k. What are your thoughts on bringing in players who have started off the year in your 500s, have dipped a little bit, but have now rebounded or will rebound based on a few big scores? I know Redmond scored 132 and Withern scored 118. What are your thoughts on bringing in players who started off high and are now rebounded after crashing to their lowest point?
I don't mind it, but there's a reason they've come down in price. They've had a bad score. They've got durability problems, something like that. So in order to complete a full premium team, having a few of these guys is good. But if you've got, say, 5 or 6 discount options, just to sort of get your team to fully premium around quicker, I would be trying to avoid that, because over the span of the season, that will leak points for you, and these players will drop some dud scores here and there.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. I think you should, rather than looking at it as a rebound opportunity and then hope that they continue their trajectory, I think you'd rather try and pick it up that they've had 2 to 3 good scores. and just pay for what they're capable of scoring rather than a hypothetical of what they used to score. Yeah, moving on to the next one. This is obviously quite really relevant with regards to the rookie crisis at the moment. But what are your thoughts on bringing in players who have started off obviously with Humphrey and Artie Jones? Artie Jones was 123, Humphrey's 160. Obviously had a few shit scores. That's why they didn't get up in price much, but now they've gone up in price and over the 200k mark because I think both of them scored close to 100. I think Humphrey scored 116 and Artie Jones 92 with a big break even. I mean, a very low break even, sorry, in the negatives. What are your thoughts on bringing in these two as essentially a cash grab, even though they're considered essentially now higher rookies?
I don't mind it. I like the Humphrey selection because he played a bit more up the ground and he can be sort of used as a player across the bias because he's got that really good buy. I think it's the round 12 or round 13 buy. He's got good job security, having won the Rising Star as well. So he's a player and a body you can field over the buys, and that 117 will be in his system. So hopefully he makes 100,000. I don't expect him to make 150 from here, but I think because there aren't any clear standout rookie options, he's one I'm looking at bringing in because, yeah, the reasons I just mentioned. And I think he's not really at risk of getting dropped, and he plays a half decent role, whereas Arthur Jones plays up the ground a bit more, sort of forward pocket, and hasn't really done much. So except for last week. So I don't mind it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Artie Jones is a bit of a riskier one for sure. Considering that he's played a lot of games this season for a rookie and has only really spiked in the last couple of weeks. And that's in correlation. The Dogs doing pretty well up the ground. Humphrey, yeah, he's in that kind of Rory Atkins category at the moment with regards to being at that price with a big break even. I guess the main difference is if you looked at last week between Atkins and Waddell, at least Waddell looked like he had a bit more of a consistent role and a job security-wise at Hawthorn. Whereas if you look at the other rookie options now in comparison to Humphrey, you've got Sharp, who could go any minute, and you've got Drury, who looked hopeless. So,
And Humphrey's
yeah, I think
not at risk of getting dropped.
Yeah. I mean, he was brought in as a high-touted rookie. He was already at 173k, so you're pretty much only paying about 30, 40k more. I guess it just depends on who you're planning to bring in as a result of Humphrey. So if say you're like, I don't know, you need to do one up, one down, and you can only afford a 500k mid because of Humphrey, then you maybe want to look elsewhere and get a Drury or a Sharp. However, if a Sharp, if it doesn't matter, then probably Humphrey's your guy. But if a Sharp or Drury enables you to get an Oliver or someone like that, you probably want to steer clear of Humphrey if that's the case. Because at the end of the day, whilst it's quite convenient for buyer structure and all that, he is a pretty expensive rookie, and if he fails, it kind of it hurts a fair bit. But I guess the plus side is that that he's going to save a few people over the buyers. He's a warm body as long as he plays. But moving on to our last discussion, this is more of an AFL-based one, which we have done for the last couple of weeks. With regards to the ladder at the moment, obviously both our teams are in the top 8. Who knows for how long with regards to my lot. But what are your thoughts on the current and do you see anyone dropping out that's in there at the moment? Or do you think I know that there's this old age saying where I think I don't know who said it, but it's like after round 6 or 7 or something, basically the top 8 doesn't change. Are you sold on the top 8 at the moment, or do you think there is more movement to be had? I know Adelaide was the latest one to knock Carlton out of the top 8. Or do you think the top 8's pretty sold from here?
I think the top 8 is pretty much set except for the Dogs. I think the Dogs and perhaps the Saints might fall out. Otherwise, I don't see anyone else who's currently in the top 8 falling. And the teams that may challenge those two teams would be Carlton and maybe I'm not even sure. Carlton, and then maybe you can throw a blanket around Essendon, Gold Coast, Richmond, Sydney. But I think it's pretty much set. I think one of Bulldogs and St Kilda are at risk against, say, a Carlton, but otherwise I don't see too much changing. I think the best teams are currently where they belong.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think, yeah, the Dogs have been playing good footy as per shown. Their probably percentage hurts a little bit. But if you look at that bottom 9, Sydney at the moment has so many injuries in key players. I don't think they can get their season back on track, and they just look really slow at the moment without those key players. Richmond had that impressive win against Geelong, but I guess, how much more can they afford? As you probably said, Carlton's the one that if they, probably desperately need a finals berth to keep Voss's job, to be blunt.
Yeah.
But they're already, 2 points behind the 8 as well. I think the benefit, as a Saints supporter, but obviously the Dogs in the same boat on 24 points. You've got a 6-point buffer essentially from 8. Geelong, I expect to bounce back even higher than the Saints and Dogs eventually come season's end, but I wouldn't be too surprised if that stayed the same, to be honest, because, the way that the Blues are playing in particular is probably the one team you look out for. Finals-wise, aren't doing the greatest at all. That is to be blunt. They look pretty shit ass at the moment. But before we wrap up, I know it's been a bit of a shorter podcast, but what are your trades moving forward to round 10, I believe?
Yeah, that's
them
actually a really good question. I think this is the hardest week of trading because there aren't any clear standout options. So I wouldn't mind getting your opinion on this, and any of the viewers in maybe the comment section or whatnot, you can let us know. But I'm thinking of trading out, getting it up now. So trading out Warple, Hopper, and Chandler. So Hopper is pretty self-explanatory. He's injured. Chandler has a pretty high break even, and Warple I wouldn't mind holding on to, but he's the only player I can happily get rid of who's got a bit of money on him. And then I'm thinking of bringing in Merritt purely because Parrish is out. He's got West Coast and North Melbourne back to back, or he plays both teams 4 times in the run home. Generally finishes the season strong, so I don't mind the Merritt pick, although his scoring hasn't been amazing. And then I'm thinking of bringing in Humphrey purely because he's a rookie with solid job security and a good buy, and who perhaps could spark another good score. And then I've got a bit of money, and then I'm thinking of bringing in a pod in Matt Kennedy purely because he has shown the ability to score well. He's been the sub, hence his price has taken a hit. And then he's one I can sort of play throughout the buys. He has the last buy and then trade him out on his buy. But yeah, they're very high risk. Kennedy could get subbed again. Humphrey could score 30 and Merritt could get tagged and play half forward. So they all have the ability to blow up into my face. But I'm looking at it at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty solid trades. I guess I'm in a similar boat at the moment. Don't have any boost left. Obviously, I used them pretty early on. So I'm looking at 2 trades. Obviously, it was a bit frustrating because I thought I was going to hold Hopper another week, or as long as possible. But yeah, Chandler and Hopper out at the moment. One of 3 options really. Humphrey in, and then essentially have him on field, swapping with Ryan as a loop as long as Fergus Green doesn't play. And then obviously Merritt comes in. I know that he scored just under 100, but yeah, with the run he's got, you'd assume that he'd do pretty well, and obviously plays the Tigers on Dream Time. Who they leak points is they don't really tag, so he could have a huge score come Saturday night. But the other option, obviously, is to go down another 100k to a Sharp or a Drury, have essentially 200k left in the bank if I did that Merritt trade, or essentially get me to Oliver in 2 moves, which would be interesting to discussion when it comes to teams as well, because it'll depend on how that goes. But other than that, we'll keep it nice and short, and we'll good luck for the weekend in your trades. Enjoy the footy with the Dreamtime stuff and the Indigenous round coming up, and then we'll catch you next week.